Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here to give you my standard review of the new Sigma 24mm F3.5 DG-DN lens. Now, this is part of their I series, which now includes the 45mm f2.8, the 35mm f2, and the 65mm f2 lenses, along with this 24mm f3.5. Now, I really liked both the 35mm and 65mm f2 that I reviewed in late November, early December of 2020, and I became aware of this lens at that time, but the development cycle was a little bit longer for the 24mm. I have to confess that I was a little less excited over this particular lens as the others, mostly because of that small maximum aperture, which, you know, I find it hard to get excited with a prime lens that has a maximum aperture only as large as a zoom lens, and in this case actually smaller than what you can get on a typical zoom that covers 24mm. At the same time, though, I was pleasantly surprised by the end results, and after I actually used the lens, I have to confess it grew on me during my review period. And so today we're going to give you kind of an overview review of the lens itself. If you want more detail and a deep dive into image quality, take a look at the definitive review instead. So first of all, these I-series lenses are perhaps my favorite Sigma lenses ever in terms of the craftsmanship, attention to detail, and the fact that they are such premium lenses that are really made out of premium materials, you know, all metal and glass, but they're also really nice and compact and fairly lightweight at the same time. I really think that Sigma has found a unique niche here that is a great kind of counterpoint to their much larger, maximum aperture art series lenses. And so there are those that would never buy an art series lens that I think would be tempted by these new little I-series DN lenses because of the nature of how you do photography and, you know, how you like to pack your gear. Everything here, as noted, is metal and glass. We do have a gasket at the lens mount. No other internal seals, but at least there's something there to help with weather resistance. It does have an aperture ring that has nice detents at 1/3 stops, and then a firmer detent between f22, which is minimum aperture, and going into an automatic if you just like to control aperture from within the camera. There is no declick option that I'm aware of. There is an AF/MF switch on the barrel itself. I find it a little hard to get at because of the small nature of the lens and the fact that the aperture and zoom rings are raised. I find it, once it's mounted on the camera, a little bit hard to get at it, particularly this time of year where I've got gloves on very often when I'm out shooting in nature. As noted, the actual manual focus ring is nicely damped. It is a little bit hard sometimes to get at, once again, because of the small barrel and the growth of the lens hood. If you've got the lens hood on there, trying to get at the manual focus ring, particularly again with gloves, is a little bit of a challenge, but everything moves nicely and they've done a nice job of focus emulation through the manual focus ring. The lens hood itself is very, very nice. It's also all metal. I like the fact that it looks organically a part of the lens rather than something cheap and plastic tacked onto an otherwise nice lens. And so I give them high marks for that. For those of you that are interested, when you reverse the lens for storage, it does cover, the lens hood does cover both of the focus and aperture rings. And so you're going to need to, reverse the hood for that. Once again, like the 35 and the 65mm, you have two options to approaching the front cap. A traditional plastic pinch style, then also a magnetic metal cap that can go on there. And so you can use whichever one suits your fancy. I will note that if you're going to use the lens hood, if you have the lens hood out and fixed in place, it is near impossible to remove the magnetic cap, just because there's not enough room to get in there and kind of pop it free. And so the pinch cap with the center pinch is a little bit easier to access in that situation. The lens itself is beautifully compact here. It has a 55mm front filter thread. It's about 65mm in diameter at its widest point, but it's only about 50mm or 2 inches long, weighs only 230 grams. And so beautifully compact, very discreet. If you're a street shooter, for example, or you like to travel, light, this is going to be a great option in that regard. I'm also very happy with the autofocus performance. It's got a stepping motor that is very quiet and smooth in operation. Literally nothing negative to report on that front. It got the job done, and as we can see for focus pulls, it is incredibly smooth and quiet in operation. So great results there. You can also see that there is very minimal focus breathing, and so if that's a concern for you for video work, you know, that's obviously a positive here. When it comes to the image quality is also very, very strong. One negative, and that is that it has fairly strong vignette at f3.5, close to 3.5 stops in the corners, which is somewhat surprising considering how small the maximum aperture is. But the lens is also very compact and it's a wide focal length, so maybe less surprising when you consider that. But that is going to be something that is certainly going to require correction. And as you can see in this scene, if you've got snow in the foreground, you'll definitely see it, or bright points in the sky. You will see that vignette. It will need to be corrected. I needed to use about a +80 in Lightroom and slide the midpoint all the way to 0 to correct for it. But fortunately, it was nice and linear and it corrected fairly well. The automatic correction profiles in camera will take care of corrections for either JPEGs or video. You'll need to use correct for RAWs in post software as per usual. There is a minimal amount of pincushion distortion. I used a -6 to correct. I was surprised that it was pincushion rather than barrel, but the good news is that it's actually much less distortion than what you'll find in any equivalent zoom, and it's also easier to correct, nice and linear, and so good results there. Now, when it comes to contrast, contrast is great from wide open because there is basically no lateral or longitudinal chromatic aberrations that are impacting the image. And so very good contrast and micro contrast starting at f3.5 all across the frame, as you can see. And as you stop it down, it just gets better still. And at f5.6 to f8, I think it delivers fantastic results, even on a high resolution body like my 42 megapixel A7R Mark III. And so I just really like the images. They're very crisp, and again, a very good acuity, rendering of fine detail, good micro contrast, and so images just look fantastic even when you're looking at them at a pixel level. It also showed very high levels of resistance to flare, and so even if I panned across the sun, very little flare artifacts, contrast remains strong, next to no ghosting. Great stuff on that front. And again, that's definitely a better performance than what you're going to see on an equivalent zoom. And finally, there are very low levels of Coma as well. And so while, it wouldn't be at the top of my list due to having that smaller maximum aperture for astrophotography or, shooting at night, it actually delivered really good results with low levels of Coma, very crisp star points. And so I was actually, again, pleasantly surprised by that. So at the end of the day, the execution of this lens exceeds the idea. It's a better lens in reality than what it was on paper, at least as far as I go. I have a hard time getting excited over a lens that is, 2/3 stops slower than the equivalent zooms that cover that, f3.5 versus f2.8. But at the same time, if your object is something small and light that is high performing, this is one of the best wide angle options that I've seen. A little bit larger and a little bit heavier, but probably my next favorite lens, if you're looking for an alternative that's a little bit higher performing in terms of maximum aperture, would probably be Sony's 20mm f1.8G, which, it's significantly bigger than this lens, but it's still relatively compact, and it's a beautifully performing lens. At $550, I don't consider this lens to be cheap. It is cheaper than some alternatives, but it also has that disadvantage of that smaller maximum aperture. But if you're more concerned about getting a premium performance from a small lens, this is probably well worth your consideration. And obviously, if you're a Leica shooter, that price point is going to seem more reasonable than what it does on Sony. So at the end of the day, I think for the right crowd, if you're intrigued maybe with the idea of this lens, I think you'll love the execution of it. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you'll look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review, also linkage to an image gallery if you want to look at more photos. Beyond that, there are buying links, though some of them are still populating because this lens is just now coming to market. And beyond that, there's also linkage to follow me on social media, become a patron, sign up for my newsletter that comes out every Thursday. And beyond that, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button and be sure to click to get notifications when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day and let the light in.